Today on Roundtable Perspective, Pemon Rami, an exceptionally gifted filmmaker, joins me in examining the relationship between art and social justice. He's been making films since he was 14. He's the first African-American casting director in Chicago. He worked on such films as The Blues Brothers and Cooley High and Uptown Saturday Night. Join me. Welcome to Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz, and I'm joined today by my guest, Pemon Rami, who is an international filmmaker, director, educator, and I'm delighted to have him here. We're going to discuss his experiences in the film industry and in the city of Chicago. I'm really pleased to have you here because it's not often I get to talk to somebody that has both the expertise and talent with a demonstrable commitment to social justice and equality. So welcome. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, thank you for having me here. You know, it was interesting walking through the control room and looking at the face of some of the young people that were there and knowing that they're the future of this industry. You know, so I am glad to be here and to share at this time.
Well, I don't want this to be a complete discussion about history because I know you're continuing to do productions now, and we will talk about some of those. But I actually would like to begin with what you just said, looking at the faces of our students that are producing this show, and your experience, your history, often being described as the first black casting director for films from Chicago, and the films, I've seen all these movies, Blues Brothers, Mahogany, Cooley High, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, Uptown Saturday Night, and I'm sure there's more. But my first question to you was, how would we know that it was you? How would we know that the casting director was African American for these films or other films?
You know, it's interesting. I don't think that you would. You know, a lot of times when you're working on projects, you do them because of the nature of the beast, of the story. And it just so happened that I was in a position as the film industry in Chicago was developing to be at the top of my game.
When are we're talking?
We're talking the early 70s because I was one of the top directors in the city. I was probably the youngest professional director to have worked in Chicago. I started directing when I was 14. I directed my first professional piece when I was 17. So a lot of people in the industry knew me because I was, you know, creating a lot of creative projects here in the city.
The ones that you directed when you were younger, were they linked to the political life of the time? I mean, Martin Luther King was here in the mid to late 60s, and the civil rights movement and the boycott against the Chicago schools for I mean, is that what informed your films, or was that like a separate part of your life?
No, it was completely connected. And I'm not sure how you separate it as an artist, you know, because what you live to do on a daily basis has to inform your art, or why are you producing it in the first place?
You would hope so.
You would hope so,
Yes.
Yeah. You know, I ask young people a lot, like, why are you creating? And if you're an artist, for example, are you creating because you want to have your work in a museum? Are you doing it because you want to be in an art gallery? Are you doing it because you want to make $1 million? I mean, why are you creating this art, and what story are you trying to tell? Because in the long run, your art supersedes your life. You know, it's going to be around a long time after you're gone. I happen to be born in a period where social justice was more important than art. It was more important that we controlled the development of our lives than it was to just tell pretty stories. And so
it would seem like those would go together, though, because part of controlling our life is being able to control the story, either that we tell or the story that's told about us.
That is true, and at the same time, you have to inform young people as they're growing up that there is some value in your life. You know, when we look at what's happening in the streets today, a lot of that has to do with the fact that some people have no value for life. And so when you look at the fact that someone would shoot you because you stepped on their gym shoe, and your life is not as important as the shoe that they have on, there's something wrong in the heads of these folks. we chose during that period of time to create art that would uplift the quality of life and the people that were around us. And so my mentors would not have allowed me to do anything else other than that. I happened to come along at a time where I worked with Ted Ward, who was one of the founders of the Negro Federal Theater with Langston Hughes and Richard Wright, with Oscar Brown Jr., Okoro Harold Johnson, Dr. Bobby Wright, who was a psychologist, Dr. Barbara Sizemore. All of these people took me under their wing.
And they're all heavily involved in addressing the conditions of life.
Yes. And so I just happened to be able to put a creative tint to it. Because my art, for example, I led a march down to what is now called the Thompson Center, where the Picasso is, in 1969, where we were trying to get the Board of Education to change the way that we were learning, to bring in more black teachers, to black business, to teach black history. And my contribution to that march was not only helping to organize it, but I built a coffin and staged the death of the Board of Education, which is part of my theatrical background.
Yep.
And so we made the presentations much more theatrical because that's what we did after we got off.
Probably as effective as somebody giving a long speech.
Most certainly.
I mean,
and even more.
viscerally and visually, you could see that.
Yeah, and it was the photo of the week in Ebony
Yeah,
magazine and in Jet magazine. It made all the national press.
So here's my question, because this would be a question some students have today. I don't want to do what you did, because now I will be labeled as a radical or somebody that's involved in political activity, and I just want to be able to get into the industry. So with that background, and people must have known that, how did you get recruited to become a casting director for some of these, I'd have to call some of them mainstream Hollywood films? Why wasn't that, we're not going to go there? Why was it instead, come on in?
Well, first of all, you have to be very good at what you do, and I was. As young as I was at like I said, at the top of my game. And so if you came to Chicago and you wanted to make a film of any sort, I was the person that you had to talk to. And now I did get in trouble in LA, but not because of my political thinking, but because of how people were being treated. As an example, we would shoot on days where there would be no buses. And in Chicago, in the middle of the winter, that's just harsh. So, or we would go to someone's house, and because I also did locations, and I would say to them, look, I want to use your apartment, and I'll pay you $500 a day for that. And you would, of course, say, great, I'll take
How many days?
Right? Okay, but on the other hand, if I didn't tell you that they were going to tap into your electricity, or that they were going to change your house, and that in some locations where we would go, they would say, we'll remodel it, we'll put it in whatever fashion you want to let us use it. And then in some communities, they wouldn't say that. So I would go back to the people and say, 2 days before we shot, you should call them, and you should say that you're no longer available unless these conditions are met. But it was because of what I was saying. And so people from LA would call and say, you're getting a bad reputation as a troublemaker because you are making these demands that a lot of other people are not making. But it was what was fair. And to have people in Chicago out in 20 below zero with no accommodations was just wrong.
So because you're an exceptional filmmaker and a director here, it wasn't because of your politics, but because of the talent that they were willing to allow that in.
And because of my connections.
Yep.
I mean, I knew everybody, and...
Okay, well, here that leads to the second question, okay? I said, how would we know? And you say, well, we probably wouldn't know unless somebody was knew your name. And so the other question was, what difference does it make? So you become the casting director. What exactly does that mean, and what impact could you make as a casting director on any of these films or any other films? Because the argument is, with affirmative action, we want to have different voices, different experiences. They have to be involved. So is that going to impact decisions that are made in the ultimate, what we're going to view on the screen because of what you do? Yeah,
it does. An example would be the Marva Collins story. It was called Welcome to Success. It was about a teacher. The star of the film was Cicely Tyson and Morgan Freeman, and I did the casting and the location work for that. there was a little boy that was a bad child that was supposed to be in the film. So when you're casting that, do you go to find a bad kid, and then, or
Try to
how
get
do
him
you
to act,
portray?
yeah.
And how do you portray relationships in families? So a lot of times, casting will have a great deal to do with either the empathy or the lack of empathy that you have in people, and casting directors have a great deal to do with that. The same thing with locations. If you have an apartment in the black community and you find it necessary to find a gutted building that is closed because that's where you want the apartment to be, that has more to say with your lack of understanding of the city versus what is necessary to tell the story. Yeah. When I was in
Well,
Nigeria...
did you have an effect on how the story is being told? Because I could see, when you say that, I could see a problem with that. We're going to depict the black community, and what we want is a burned out building because that's the image that I'm trying to present, which is not the only image that you might present. So could you affect that?
Yes, I did affect it by just having a voice. Now, sometimes you don't get the effect that you want, you know, but you have to raise the question. So when we did Blues Brothers, for example, we shot the scene at Maxwell Street for people that saw that. It was a big party scene. I had 600 people out
Aretha's
there.
Down there.
Aretha's down there, Muddy Waters,
Yeah.
a bunch of those folks. And the following day, we shot the scene where they jumped the bridge. And the call was for 25 cars, nondescript, of a Cadillac, a Volkswagen, this color and that. Not the people, but the cars. So because I had shot the day before, I hired people that were there that had the cars. So Landis said to me, "Why is it so dark out here?" True story. And I said, "Well, you needed cars, there was no call." So he proceeded to tell me that I was wrong for not casting more white people in that scene.
Well, they're underrepresented, I understand.
They weren't, yeah, but you didn't see them anyway.
I'm
You know, they,
white people are always underrepresented.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I had an impact on how we place people, how they were seen, and then giving people opportunities that they wouldn't necessarily have. You can have a role for a police officer, and that's all it mentions. So how do you cast it? Do you cast a Hispanic person, Asian, black? What, you know, how do you cast it? And so casting directors have a great deal to do with that. And the influence of just your voice in the room is important.
Yeah. I've often thought about that when you're talking about how do you represent that, because I've not done the study, but it strikes me there's probably more black female police lieutenants on television than there is in the United, and the attempt is to, you know, have a diversity of representation, but oftentimes that can be misrepresented, even if the intent is good. That begins to create this idea, like we're currently at in the U.S., well, race isn't a big issue. I saw that so-and-so as the police chief on TV last night, which doesn't exist. So it's like there's that tension between, you know, let's have some diversity, but on the other hand, if we go to misrepresent, it can have another consequence that may not be foreseen. And I think that's one of the things that has happened is you talked about being in Chicago. I do know that there's more segregation in Chicago now than when you were down at the Picasso some 40 years ago. But the images that we see on television or on the screen are much more culturally diverse. So how do you deal with that tension?
You know, I think part of the responsibility of a filmmaker is to create the world that they want to see. And I have no problem with that. But on the other hand, I think that there's a need to balance. You know, so if you want to do a story that's about a segment of the community, you have every right to be able to do that. But when you look at a network and a studio, you have an obligation to serve a broader audience. When you look at TV now, and a lot of the shows that have women leads as police officers that are really unbelievable, you know, and it's a lot of them now. And I haven't done a scientific study. It is empowering, but you have these little skinny girls taking down these, you know, 300-pound men. And there's some level of realism that has to be enforced in the way that you tell stories. And for those young people that are coming up, as you're writing, you have to write from the perspective of what is it that you want people to do as a result of what you're creating. Now, there are some challenges. For example, I think that in America, there is an issue with comedy because of how people's lives are. So when your life is down and you're not doing well, you don't necessarily want to see dramas. So Tyler Perry might be more successful because of the nature of the people's lives that he's serving.
Yeah, you don't want to dwell on this. You want some escape and some.
You got to escape.
Which is fine,
Yeah.
as long as it's not all. As long as it's not all escape.
No, because because there are stories that are important to tell, and if we're going to affect young people in their minds, and we do it all the time. I think we say that people should do their own thing, which doing their own thing means that you have seen people in the industry, in the media, that you want to emulate, and so as a result, you change your life based on those experiences, even though you say, I'm wearing this because it's me, but it's actually you because you saw a commercial or somebody else to wear
I
it.
often think that when you're talking about creativity with new filmmakers, their creativity is based upon what they have experienced, what they've seen, and their innovation comes within that, and sometimes that's limiting because that's trying to fit that mold or that template. A police procedural or something, you can change a few things, but it's still the same template, and we're not getting a new how the world might be.
No, we're not. It's interesting because I've seen a lot of plays lately. I'm a member of the Jeff Committee, the Joseph Jefferson Committee.
I know. I'm sorry we're having a conversation here. I want to get some of the things that you're doing and some of the things that you're working on now. But go ahead.
Okay, but this is pertinent to that. So I've seen over 100 plays this year, maybe 120. And what's interesting about it is two things. One, you can look at the cultural ramifications of why people are writing the stories that they're telling. But on the other hand, a lot of the plays that I've seen have basically been stolen from movies. And so, did you see Get Out?
Yes.
The movie Get Out? Okay.
Yeah.
So I saw a play recently which was called Welcome Jesus, which was about a town that was killing black people in the woods, basically, but they were all good people.
Yeah.
And so, in essence, what it was Get Out, sort of repurposed as a play. And I've seen a lot of those. And I'm going, so why aren't you coming up with an original story?
Well, part of it is, I think, I don't know if it's theater, but certainly film. It's the purpose most of them are making is to make a profit. And if they see something has been successful, it's a likely thing, we can do this again, and this may be successful and attract an audience. So the creativity isn't the prime mover. The creativity within, will it attract a paying audience, is a major ingredient, which is...
Yes, but the problem with using that recipe is that by the time you copy the movie that you think is of value...
there's a new trend.
It's a new trend, and you're working on something that's old.
Yes, which is what television tends to do. Yeah. Let's just change thing. We're gonna talk some more. But when you were here before, I don't know what happened. The taping we did went in a box, and it kind of didn't happen. But we talked before, at the time, about 93 Days, which Danny Glover was starring in, and you directed, and it was just being released, and I understand it's just now closing in London. Could you talk a little bit about what is 93? I know what it's about, but maybe tell the viewers what it's about, and then where it went, and what kind of response you got, because it also won some awards.
Yes, 93 Days is the story of when the Ebola crisis landed in Nigeria, and the impact that it had on the city, the number of people that died. It's a drama. It's not a documentary, and we did a retelling of the story. It had happened a year before we shot it, and it's an incredible story of bravery of the doctors that put themselves in the way of it spreading around the world. Had they not done that, it would have been a global pandemic because there are 21 million people in Lagos, in that one city. If he had been allowed to speak at the international convention that he had come to speak at, it would have been taken back around the world. So we shot it I didn't direct it, I produced it. We shot it in Nigeria for 3 months. and it's opened around the world. We just closed in theaters in the UK. We've done South Africa, Rwanda. There's a big theatrical audience in Africa. You know, people assume that I think Africa is one country, but it's not. And so we've done extremely well overseas. We were just nominated for an African Academy Award and the African People's Choice Awards. So I am now an Academy Award nominee.
You're an Academy Award nominee, African People's Choice. Tell me what that is, because
It's like the People's Choice Awards that we do here,
So the
except the people vote.
Okay, but it's in the different, all of the African countries.
It's
So
all
from
the
Ghana,
African countries, from Ghana, South Africa, Rwanda. There are hundreds and hundreds of films from a variety of different countries, and they
So
all
this
compete.
film was shown in all of these countries. I mean,
It was submitted for, you know, it's like the Academy Awards here. You submit your film to the Academy, and then there are hundreds of films that are nominated, and then they make the selections from there. So that process in Africa is the same way.
so the release, was it released in most countries?
In most countries, it's been released. We haven't done a U.S. release yet.
Okay.
We have a deal with Netflix and with Hulu and Amazon, but we're holding that up for the last hope of doing one short theatrical run here. Okay. But we've done most of the major festivals in the United States.
Excuse my ignorance, but what's the responsibilities for a producer that are different than the responsibilities of the director in a film like this?
Mm-hmm. The producer is responsible for two things fundamentally. One is making sure that the film is complete on time, and the second
Back
is
to work, back to work.
and that is it's done within budget. You know, it is really hard to motivate people to get the day started in the morning. You know, so we're accustomed here to coming in, going to get a cup of coffee, maybe reading the paper, check our emails, and so by the time you get the day rolling, it's 11 o'clock. Well, in film, sometimes it's the same thing. You start the day slowly, and then towards the end of the day, you're rushing to get the day finished and your project's complete. So as a producer, I'm responsible in my mind for making people attack the day so that you start the day strong and you finish it strong. And then you have to do a certain number of pages. So when I arrived in Nigeria, for example, I told them we wouldn't finish the film on time. And they told me that I needed to be more patient because I was in Nigeria and I had to have faith. And I said, I do have faith. I have faith in math. Math says that you can finish 4 to 6 pages a day.
You need this number. Yeah.
You multiply the number of pages times the number of days. We finished 2 weeks late.
Yeah.
And we finished 2 weeks late, you know, because the director wouldn't cut the scenes that I thought that he should have cut. I was able to get it down to the proper runtime when we were editing in London. But the struggle for the director is to keep the creative staff and crew in line, also to hire the crew and staff, and to make sure that you finish on time.
So you want to hire people that are going to be there in the morning.
Most certainly, and on time.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge when you're in another country because there's so many things that you're up against. For example, I shot a project in Haiti, and we went to scout the location.
Was that? What was
this was the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable story. And we were there, and we scouted some locations. So we go out to this location, and we were going to shoot this interview at this hotel on the balcony. And it was quiet. It was an isolated part of the hotel. So when we get ready to film, what we didn't know was that on Friday, they reversed the street. And it was dogs and trucks, and it was horrible. You know, so a lot of what producing is about is pre-planning, and pre-planning to the point where you cut all unnecessary scenes, where you make sure that you can complete it in a timely fashion, and also that the film only has the scenes in it that are necessary to move it forward.
Well, I kind of feel like I'm a producer here because I'd like to keep talking, but I also have to make sure that we finish at a appropriate time. Right. So that's all the time we have for our program today, but Pemon Rami is going to join me next week, so I want you to tune in. Thank you, Pemon, for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'll see you next week.